Hi class, welcome to week 10. This week we're going to continue our discussions of persuasive speaking, and a lot of this will focus on fallacies this week. I put a lot of information about fallacies in the week 10 lectures and readings folder, so we'll talk about that. But let's begin talking about what is the creative process for persuasive speaking. So what is the creative process for persuasive speaking? Well, it is starting, obviously, researching, creating, presenting, listening, and evaluating. Remember, the process is not linear. So then how do you choose a focused persuasive topic? Stop and think about what you already know about the audience in the situation. Maybe interview someone who can tell you about the audience in the situation. You can talk to me. You can survey members or potential members of the audience to gain knowledge. And you can also do a little research or simple detective work, perhaps on the internet. You can also create what's called a persuasive idea bank. So what you do, start with a clean piece of paper and evaluate your speech assignment or speaking event for this class. Then, after you look at all of the information for your persuasive speech, make a list of potential topics, and use free association and/or popular websites to help. So now you can select and narrow your persuasive topic. So consider your topic, the target audience, and the situation, and do some preliminary research before committing to a topic. You never know, it might not be as persuasive as you think. So then you can ask yourself, what kind of response do you want from your audience? Are you trying to convince, stimulate, or actuate? Also, who is the target audience? This is the primary group of people you are aiming to appeal to. So then you want to identify your specific purpose. This is your single statement that combines your general purpose, your specific audience, and your objective. Then you want to identify your central idea, also known as the thesis statement. This is one sentence that states the core claim you are trying to make. Now, this is different from your informative speeches. In persuasion, this will take the form of a proposition of fact, value, or policy. And I did put a fact, value, or policy worksheet in your lectures and readings folder to help you with this. Then you can create your working outline. Again, questions are okay for the working outline in persuasive speeches. However, by the time you work on your preparation outline, they should be in declarative sentences. So now we're going to talk about how you conduct your research. Research is key in persuasive speaking. So remember to collect citation information as you research. It'll help you save time when you're putting your PowerPoints together and your speeches together. Complex topics require good detective work, and all of the answers will not be found in one place. Use the table on page 369 in your book to guide your research and determined by the proposition you are proposing. Now then, you can talk about how you construct the persuasive outline. The persuasive outline is you record the topic, specific purpose, the central idea, you use full sentences, deal with one issue at a time, and then, just like the other speeches you do in this class, develop the introduction and conclusion after you're done the body. Remember, too, that I've given you, just like your other speeches, a skeleton to help you with your outline. Also remember, use the skeleton outline. This will help you correct the outline format, balance the main points and subpoints, insert any links, and use your proper citations. It'll also help you with your annotated bibliography for that. So I want to talk a little bit about specifically how you organize the body of a persuasive speech, because it's very different than your informative speech. These organizational strategies are deemed stronger for persuasive than other strategies, such as topical. You can use topical for a persuasive speech, not the best. Causal, comparative, problem solution, and Monroe's motivated sequence are much better. So then, once you have chosen your strategy, commit to it. Select your strategy, write your main points, and stick to that strategy. It'll help you be more persuasive. So construct your main points, 3 or 4 possible subtopics, and think about the strategy you want to use and the ways it might influence your main points. Look to your central idea for focus here. Once you have the arguments you want to use, you're considering appeals and types of arguments, decide how to arrange them. The primacy model suggests that you should put the strongest arguments first in the body of the speech. The recency model, on the other hand, is the reverse of primacy. Begin with the weakest argument and then end with the strongest. So what should you include in the introduction and conclusion? That's what we're going to talk about next. Don't take too long to get to your point. Remember, an introduction should be no more than 15% of your total speech time. So quickly get through the attention grabber, credibility, relevance to your audience, and your thesis statement. Make sure to give your audience one more push to accept your viewpoint, but your conclusion should be less than 5% of your total speech time. Wrap it up quick. Your summary statement, audience's response, and the wow statement. So then what should you consider when preparing to present your speech? Language is so important in persuasive speaking. Be accurate, correct, familiar, and concrete. Be appropriate, things that are suitable to you, your audience, and the situation. You still want to be conversational in word choice, sentence structure, and delivery aspects. And finally, be distinctive, vivid language, and unique speech devices. In persuasion, delivery must be powerful, direct, confident, and trustworthy. This is both in your verbal and nonverbal behavior. Remember, presentation aids are required for this speech, just like the informative. You need a PowerPoint or Prezi. These can help your audience understand facts, figures, follow the logic of your argument, and they can be provocative through images and short bullets. So now, remember, one of the things you're going to do is you're going to also evaluate your fellow classmates' persuasive speeches. So listen effectively. When persuasion is the goal, critical listening is even more important. The audience, you need to listen actively and critically. Evaluate the message. Evaluate the message for clarity, accuracy, and organization. You should know exactly what pattern they're using. Never lose sight of the central idea, proposition, target audience, and goal. Remember what I said in the beginning of this speech. We're going to talk about fallacies next. So you need to evaluate for fallacies. Fallacies are faulty arguments or errors in logic created intentionally or unintentionally. I'm going to go over a few that are in your book, but there are tons of fallacies that you can find. So the first one, non sequitur, in Latin, this means does not follow. It occurs when a speaker's conclusion does not connect to the argument's premise. Hasty generalization. This is when you draw a general conclusion without support. It occurs when speakers have insufficient support materials. Here's some examples. I have had 3 major problems with my new car. This brand of car is worthless. There's no support. My grandmother became addicted to gambling. Gambling should be banned because it's addictive. Again, you can't just generalize based on one situation. Faulty use of authority. This occurs when faulty information or testimony is used. Sources may have insufficient expertise, knowledge, or biases. For example, consider if you remember, when Dennis Rodman was interviewed about the U.S.'s foreign relations in North Korea. Think about that. Why would this be considered a faulty use of authority? Well, a basketball player is not an expert on foreign policy. Post hoc ergo or propter hoc. This is when the speaker assumes that when one event comes after the another, the first event is caused by the second. It's also called the black cat syndrome. Post hoc ergo is Latin for after this, therefore, because of this. It's very common fallacy in causal reasoning. Here's an example. I vaccinated my cat got sick, the vaccination caused my cat to get sick. Ad hominem. Very, very popular in politics. You are probably seeing this in, whenever you see political elections, they attack the person instead of the issue. In Latin, ad hominem means to or against the person, typically involves an attack on an individual supporting the claim or counter argument. Here's an example. Who are you to question my educational policy? You don't even have children in our school system. Appeal to tradition. This occurs when the speaker assumes that something is better just because it's older. So they base your claims on solid forms of evidence rather than on traditional beliefs. That's how you cannot appeal to tradition. So just because something is old doesn't mean it's better. Just because something has always been that way doesn't mean it's better. My grandfather bought a Ford. My father bought a Ford, so Ford must be the best. False analogy. You want to make sure two things being compared in analogy are indeed similar. But a false analogy occurs when two things are being compared that are not similar. The either-or fallacy. This occurs when only two alternatives are compared when there are actually more options. So here's an example. You are either for prayer in schools or you are an atheist. Obviously, there are more than two of those options. Straw person. This occurs when a speaker distorts or exaggerates or misrepresents a person's actual position. So you always present other speakers' arguments as presented. Here's an example. Some senators are pushing to cut funding and troops for the current war. I can't understand why they want to leave us defenseless and our current troops on the front lines exposed. Ad populum. This occurs when a speaker argues that a claim must be accurate because others have said so. Kind of like remember what you did in school. Use popular opinion to supplement other forms of evidence. So ad populum is Latin for to the people, which distracts the audience's attention from examining a claim by arguing the claim must be accurate since so many people believe it. Beware of everyone is doing it claims. Faulty emotions. Faulty emotional appeals, these use only emotional appeals or unethically manipulate an audience's emotions to get them to accept the claim. Don't rely on just pathos. Slippery slope. So this occurs when a speaker argues that a relatively small a small event sets off a chain reaction. So always consider a middle ground. Here's an example. If you drop out of school, you'll end up in jail. If you allow for an increase in state taxes, the government will just want more and more. Again, these are slippery slope fallacies. So that ends this week's presentation. So here's a good checklist for evaluating the persuasive speech that you can use for both yourself, for evaluating your own speech, and for evaluating your peers. So now, like I said, this week we focus a lot on organization and a lot on what fallacies to avoid. So what you want to do now is go through the information for this week and let me know any questions you may have.